right, it's good to have everybody back again this evening for our Wednesday evening Bible study, looking at church history through the trail of blood. This is part number 4. We're going to be looking at the chart in quite a bit of this particular lesson. I believe if you will carefully study this chart, you'll be able to understand the history, and it will greatly aid your memory in retaining what you hear and see. Actually, that's part of Dr. Carroll's writing, not mine. So remember, this chart is supposed to cover a period of 2,000 years of religious history. Notice that both the top and the bottom of the chart are some figures. The same figures I lost my place. The lines are about the same. Okay. This is the original slide, and I'll see if I can. We had to do it this way this evening. My computer broke down, so I had to pull out some backups. So. I've got the blanks in what's in your study guide. I've got those highlighted in yellow so that it'll be a little bit easier to see. Now let me get back to where I was. No, that's okay. I lost my place. Also. No, now notice at both the top and the bottom of the chart some figures. The same figures go at the top and the bottom. I can't even read this evening. 100, 200, 300, and so on into 2,000. They represent 20 centuries of time. The vertical lines separating the different centuries. If you have your chart handy, you'll see probably it's easier to see than what it is up here. But you see, here's where he's talking about, and then down on the bottom, and then the vertical lines. All right, now notice on the chart near the bottom, other straight lines. This line running left to right, the long way of the chart. And that is, I pressed the wrong button. That is this line right here. The lines are about the same distance apart as the vertical lines. But you can't see them all the way because they are covered by a very dark spot representing in history what is known as the Dark Ages. And that'll be explained a bit later. Now, between the two lower lines, right here, you'll find some names, or here and here, apologize. You'll find some names of countries. Italy, not used to clicking through here, so I forget. I apologize. I forget to do it sometimes. I used to accustom somebody else doing it for me. So anyway, these are nicknames. The countries. All right, you got that one. All right. Okay. They're covered in part by the Dark Ages. They are also filled with names, but not with the names of countries. Right. Yes. That's what I had skipped there. Of course, not all of history is made in some of the countries in every period, but some special history is made in these special countries at these special periods, and we will be looking at in detail at some of that. Now notice again, near the bottom of the chart, other lines a little higher. They too are covered in part by the Dark Ages. They are also full of nicknames. They are nicknames, names given to these people by their enemies. Christians, that is the first. Disciples were called Christians first at Antioch, according to Acts 11:26. This occurred about AD 43. Either the pagans or the Jews gave them that name in derision. All the other names in the column were given in the same manner. Montanist, Novatianist, Donatist, Paulicians, Albigenses, Waldenses, etc., and Anabaptists. Anabaptists, they were called Anabaptists because they rebaptized people who came out of these other churches. All of these will again and again be referred as the lectures progress. But look again at the chart. You see the red circles. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right above the Christians, what was the answer?
Nicknames.
Nicknames?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Nicknames. You see some red circles, and they're scattered nearly all over the chart. They represent churches. Single individual churches in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in mountains and valleys and so forth. Their being blood red indicates martyr blood. Christ, their founder, died on the cross. All the apostles, save two, John and Judas, suffered martyr deaths. Judas betrayed his Lord and died in a suicide. The apostle John, according to history, was boiled in a great cauldron of oil. However, he survived that. And he died of old age. Sorry? Yes, John was the only one to actually die a natural death. This cauldron of oil, yes, that is recorded in history, but he did not die of that. He survived that. You notice some of the circles are solidly black. Now, when Brother Bernie made this chart that we're looking at, you don't see those black circles. On the original chart that Sister Katie is looking at, you do see black circles. Yeah, there are some up here, over here at the top, yes. But they are scattered all the way through, just like the red ones are. At least that's. Is that way on the original chart? Okay, so the only ones that you're actually seeing then are these up here. Okay. All right. They represent churches also, but erring churches. Churches that had gone wrong in life or doctrine. There were numbers of these even before the death of Peter, Paul, and John. Now, having now about concluded with a general introduction and some very necessary and even vital preliminaries, Dr. Carroll says, I come to the regular history. This is the first period. Well, there's a chart. And now I think that's the one that you're looking at there, Katie. And it resembles this chart here that we have.
It vaguely resembles the chart that we have posted, but it does note the dark ages a little bit clearer. But the irregular churches or erring churches are not represented.
Okay. He says in his notes that they are, but somewhere along the line, down through the years, those probably got left off.
Well, if you look at the chart, you'll see irregular churches in black.
Yes.
In the first century, 100
Right.
AD. You'll see irregular church. 200 AD, you'll see irregular churches, right? And then 300 AD, it just becomes a solid line of irregular churches.
Oh, I see now. Yes.
It just becomes a solid line.
Right. They were individuals. Now it solidifies. Okay. That's how those are represented.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, the first period is AD 30 through 500. Under the strange but wonderful impulse and leadership of John the Baptist, the eloquent man from the wilderness, and under the loving touch and miracle-working power of Christ himself, and the marvelous preaching of the 12 apostles and their immediate successors, the Christian religion spread mightily during the first 500-year period. However, it left a terrible, bloody trail behind it. Judaism and paganism bitterly contested every forward movement. John the Baptist was the first of the great leaders to give up his life. His head was taken off. I think we looked at that in some previous sessions. Soon after him went the Savior himself, the founder of the Christian religion. He died on the cross, the cruel death of the cross. Now, following their Savior in rapid succession, fell many other martyred heroes. Stephen was stoned. We have that in the 8th chapter of Acts, I believe that it is. Matthew was slain in Ethiopia. Mark was dragged through the streets until dead. Now, Dr. Carroll is not, he's just giving us an overview. He's not giving us details. Many of the details are very gruesome. Luke was hanged. Peter and Simeon were crucified. Sorry? Inverted, right upside down. Tradition says that he requested that he be crucified that way because he didn't want to dishonor the Savior being crucified upright. Now that's what tradition says. I don't know that that could be proven beyond the shadow of a doubt from history, but that's what's commonly told. Andrew was tied to a cross, so I would think he was probably crucified as well. James was beheaded. Philip, crucified and stoned. Now, Philip was not one of the apostles, and Luke and Mark were not either. Bartholomew, he was one of the apostles, and he was flayed alive. You know how you fillet a fish? Just cutting strips off at a time? Yeah. Thomas was pierced with lances. If I remember correctly, somewhere I read that he lost his life somewhere in Africa. Thomas did. All right, James the Less, thrown from the temple and beaten to death. I want to say this is the James that was related to Jesus, the half-brother of Jesus. Because I've read somewhere where that he was still in Jerusalem because he was the pastor of the church at Jerusalem after the dispersion. And excuse me, he was supposedly taken and thrown from the temple wall about 100 feet. He survived that, and then they beat him to death just to make sure that he was dead. Jude was shot to death with arrows. This is the Jude that wrote the book of Jude. Matthias is one that took Judas Iscariot's place, you recall. He was stoned to death. And then Paul was beheaded. Okay, everybody caught up there? More than 100 years had gone by before all this had happened. This hard persecution by Judaism and paganism continued for 2 more centuries. You'll see that on the chart. And yet mightily spread the Christian religion. It went into all the Roman Empire, Europe, Asia, Africa, England, Wales, and about everywhere else where there was any civilization. The churches greatly multiplied, and the disciples increased continuously. But some of the churches continued to go into error. The first of these changes from New Testament teachings embraced both policy and doctrine. In the first 2 centuries, the individual churches rapidly multiplied, and some of the earlier ones, such as Jerusalem, Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, etc., grew to be very large. Jerusalem, for instance, had many thousand members. We'll look at these verses in just a moment. Possibly 25,000 or even 50,000 or more. I'm not sure where Dr. Carroll gets his information on that. I've never seen any. But apparently he did somewhere. A close student of the book of Acts and epistles will see that Paul had a mighty task, even in his day, in keeping some of the churches straight. You can see Peter's and Paul's prophecies concerning the future. All right, so look at Revelation 2nd and 3rd chapters as well, and that we will. Part of them anyway. Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Then they that gladly received his word were baptized, and the same day there were added unto them about 3,000 souls. This was the day of Pentecost. Acts chapter 4 and verse 4. Howbeit, many of them which heard the word believed, and the number of the men was about 5,000. Acts chapter 5, verse 14. And believers were the more added to the Lord, multitudes both of men and women. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. But these, as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall surely perish in their own corruption. In Acts chapter 20, verses 29 through 31. For I know this, that after my departing, this is Paul writing, shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn everyone night and day with tears. I think that Paul was at Corinth at that time. All right, these great churches necessarily had many preachers or elders. You see that in Acts 20 and verse 17. Some of the bishops or pastors began to assume authority not given them in the New Testament. They began to claim authority over other and smaller churches. They, with their many elders, began to lord it over God's heritage. 3 John verse 9. So here was the beginning of an error which has grown and multiplied into many other seriously hurtful errors. Here was the beginning of different orders in the ministry, running up finally to what is practiced now by others as well as Catholics. Here began what resulted an entire change from the original democratic policy and government of the early churches. This irregularity began in a small way, even before the close of the 2nd century. This is possibly the first serious departure from the New Testament church order. Acts chapter 20, verse 17. And from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called the elders of the church. This illustrates that there were plural pastors at the church of Ephesus in particular. 3 John 9, I write unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, received us not. John could not go to some churches, we don't know which one it was, because the pastor, Diotrephes, wouldn't let him. All right, conclusion to part 4. This concludes this presentation. In number 5, we will continue with Dr. Carroll's lectures, but we will also begin to take a look at the 7 churches of Asia.